Hey everybody, it's Jorik. Welcome back to the channel. I hope you are having a fantastic day. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I like to talk about moving to and living in Portugal as well as Europe travel news. This video is going to be more for Americans moving to Portugal, or if you've recently moved to Portugal and you have not been back to the US at all. I'm going to mention 5 things today. So 5 things I'm going to go through that in coming back for the holiday season, we're back in the US for a month, that I'm starting to chuckle at, and I've forgotten living in Portugal for 3 years, some differences and nuances on how the US works versus Portugal. So I'm going to go into them. For those of you that currently live in Portugal and go back and forth from the US, you may have experienced some of these, so this will resonate with you. If you have not made the move yet, these are things that will come up and maybe have been touched on other content creators, but I wanted to go through them. I think some of them you'll get a chuckle from. So the first, number one, is writing of dates for things like contract signatures on checks and whatnot. So in the US, as you know, when you're writing something, it is month, day, year. Been used to that for 49 years before moved to Portugal. And then in Europe, in Portugal, it is day, month, year when you're signing something. So it took a little while. I screwed up some things along the way when we moved to Portugal that I had to redo. And it's the first time in 3 years of being overseas that when we came back and going to the bank and having to redo some business contracts, because we have a business in the US as well as some of the banking details, I had written off, I think, probably 8 times day, month, year. And the bank representative was looking at me going, "You're off by several months, buddy." And I had to look at it and realize that I made the mistake that I didn't do month, day, year. So I will say this, it's a practical thing. It's sort of funny to me, but especially for those of you that are going and signing purchase agreements on property, rent agreements, you have a number of things that if you're going to be moving to Portugal for the visa process, whether it be D7, the digital nomad, or other visas, you have to make sure that Portugal requires, and most of the rest of the world, it's day, month, year when you're signing off, versus in the US, it's month, day, year. So that's the first thing. I thought you might get a little laugh out of that one. So, but it is a practical thing as well as somewhat funny. Number two, so the second thing is making a right on red at a traffic light. Now, we do not have a vehicle in Portugal. We decided to walk away and just use public transportation or our feet to get around. But here in Arizona at our son's, we are using his vehicle to get around. And I will say the first couple of days, it took me a little bit to understand the honking of people behind me, because in Portugal, when you have a traffic light and it's red, you do not make a right. It doesn't matter if the coast is clear and there's no traffic or pedestrian traffic, you do not take a right until the light turns green. For those of you in the vast majority of the US, when you're coming to a stoplight, as long as there isn't a sign that says no turn on red, you're able to look for oncoming traffic, look for pedestrian or bike traffic, and then make a right once you've come to a stop. So it just took a few people here in the neighborhood probably upset at me because I was not turning right and they were expecting to already be on the road going someplace. So just to make sure that you're aware of that. So a little nuance between how Portugal does it, and I'll say most of Europe, compared to the United States. The third thing, so number 3 that I'm going to bring up for you, is the grocery store slash bank slash pharmacy. And I kind of forgot about the convenience of that. So in the US, we go to place, the closest grocery store to our sons is a place called Fry's, which is a part of the Kroger brand. And in there is a bank, and it's also open on Saturdays, as well as a pharmacy. Now, we don't need the pharmacy because we do not have US healthcare anymore. But the convenience of being able to go to a one-stop shop and get your groceries, get prescriptions if needed, and get banking done if needed, including on a weekend day, a Saturday. That's not something that you're going to find in Portugal. The grocery store is separate from the pharmacy, is separate from the bank. So you have to make 3 trips to 3 different places to get what you need done. Where often in the US, you can go to one spot and get different food, money, and prescription drugs if you need them. So I would say that I don't know of any place that has a bank in it, a grocery store in Portugal. I do think that there's a couple of very large uh, places called Auchan. I think there's a hyper Auchan that also has a pharmacy in it, but it's going to be rare and hard to find. So that was something that was, I'll say, the convenience of the U.S. of having 500 million products in the grocery store, as well as having a bank and pharmacy. So again, it doesn't necessarily impact us, but it's more of a practical thing when you're thinking of time and how much it takes to get things, go to 3 different places, grocery store, bank, and pharmacy in Portugal, as opposed to just going to one place often in the US. So I thought that was kind of humorous to kind of remember that. Now I'm going to go along the line of groceries here. And the fourth thing that I'm going to mention to you, the cost of groceries. I've done videos about this. I think everyone that you've watched or read blog posts from have talked about the difference, the cost of living differences. But I wanted to put that to the test. So we normally are creatures of habit and get the same things on a weekly basis for the most part. The same fruits, vegetables, meats from a place Pingo Doce in Portugal. So that's our local grocery store. And we average for those things. Now, no household items like toilet paper, no things for the kitchen, just food sustenance. We average around 38 euros a week. And for getting those same items, and I did make sure from a weight perspective, kilograms versus pounds, I was getting the same apples and broccoli and cauliflower and salmon and chicken here at the local grocery store, this Fry's slash Kroger's, and the exact same stuff in the same weights was $72. So 38 euros to $72. Now, there is a little bit of difference between the euro and dollar right now, but not much at the time of making this video. So it was a stark difference. And when we were looking at even things like if we were going to buy wine and comparing Portugal and the cost of wine there to the US, it's not even a competition. Portuguese wine, you could buy a case of really good wine for what the cost of, let's say, a bottle of good wine is here in the US. So we just looking at food, produce, as well as meats, 38 euros in Portugal on a weekly basis versus the US 72. We even went to a competing grocery store and tried to price out the exact same thing. So it took me a little while to find out where to get everything in this competing store. But I went to it and it was $68. So it was only a few dollars less, but still much more just for a weekly cost of groceries. Now, again, at the making of this video, there's recession, inflation, a lot of stuff going on across the world. But just thinking of that times 52 weeks, those costs and that difference, the amount of savings that you have in Portugal on just eating in and making food as opposed to what you do in the US. Now, granted, it's just one location in the US, but I wanted to give you that as a frame of reference. And then the number fifth thing is I mentioned driving and making rights on reds here in the US, is driving everywhere. Sort of forget about that because again, we don't have a vehicle in Portugal, although we've rented one from time to time when we want to go on vacations or see different parts of Portugal that the public transportation wouldn't necessarily get to, but we use our feet to get everywhere, especially throughout Lisbon for the most part. And here, you got to drive everywhere. Now, I will say the caveat, and I'm generalizing that for the US because along the eastern seaboard, if you're in DC, Philly, New York, you have a better public transportation system, train system, so that may not necessarily be the case for you. But certainly as you move towards the south, Midwest, and move west, many of you living in major cities and small towns, you have to drive someplace. So what's interesting is for me, it is a 10-minute walk to go to the grocery store. We have two Pingo doses in two different directions of our apartment in Lisbon that I go to. Grab the groceries, walk back to our apartment. Here, it's almost exactly a 10-minute drive from our son's house in a particular subdivision to the closest grocery store. So I was laughing in the back seat a few days ago when we were getting some groceries, and he was not sure why I was laughing. I just kept going. We would normally walk to get this stuff where you have to drive to get anything. And it is something that when you're thinking about having a vehicle, the cost of maintenance, cost of gas these days, or petrol, and what it takes to get anywhere and do anything, unless you're in a major metropolitan city where you can walk and you live in a, let's say, downtown or city center area, if you're living out in the suburbs or in a more rural area, you're driving to get everywhere. And thankfully in Portugal, you can use public transportation, so still somebody else is doing the driving for you. Or in many smaller towns, even Lisbon and Porto, it's so walkable that you tend to walk and not need the vehicle. And it is just something as a reminder. I was thinking, again, sitting in the back seat going to the grocery store, how much money is being spent on gas to go there on a weekly basis, how much the car costs, car insurance, all of that stuff that we are not paying as an expense to live in Portugal. So it's stark and it's somewhat stunning when I start writing down the numbers and thinking about just being here in the US for a month for the holiday season and how many thousands of dollars in the course of that month we may be saving by living in Portugal as opposed to living in the US. So it is something that as you consider a move, please, reach out. My email is in the About Me section of YouTube. You can find me on most social media platforms. But if you have questions or whatnot, don't hesitate to ask because these are things that I think are good. I want to just show the differences and some things that we've experienced between Portugal and US. None of them are better or worse. I think they just are. And you can decide if these are things that you find as differences when you move and come back every once in a while. But I think that these are practical things that when you're making a decision or if you're hesitant about going to Portugal and moving overseas, when you think about how much money you are continuing to spend here in the US on everything, and you see how in almost every case you're spending less in Portugal for the same items, you think about how much money you're going through on an annual basis. I hope that you think of these things, and there's probably 20 other things that I will think of as I'm spending more time here that will be differences that you will look at and go, the check mark or the favorite is going to be Portugal as opposed to the US when it comes to lifestyle and living and how far your dollar goes. That's not true. How far your euro goes in Portugal compared to how far your dollar goes in the US. So as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch the video. Please share it with friends and family and enjoy your holiday season and your travels.